Hmong-ish is a podcast produced by Hmong American Media in Sacramento, California, and sponsored by the Hmong Organizing for Progress and Empowerment Center, also called the Hope Center, along with Culture Through Cloth. I'm your host, Pachia.
And I'm your host, Shoun.
And we are
Hmong-ish.
So, Hmong-ish is a podcast where Shoun and I share our thoughts on anything and all things Hmong, diving into our own experiences of what it means to be Hmong American and Hmong in today's times. And today, I think we have a pretty interesting topic to talk with you all about. Shoun, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about something that's really interesting and also spooky in our community, So sleep paralysis is something within our community that is really big. And Hmong, we call it zhao da zhao zhuo. So it's a common phenomenon understood in the community as, a supernatural being.
A supernatural event.
Yeah. A ghost, that's hunting you while you sleep.
It's this phenomenon where like you're sleeping and then you wake up and you feel sort of this presence over you, or you see some dark shadow, and you can't move and you're stuck, and then like it's scary. Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis?
Yes, I have a funny story actually about experiencing sleep paralysis. So when I was a kid, my sister and I, we shared the same room, right?
Yeah.
And so I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I couldn't move, and I guess I was just like groaning in bed. And then my sister was like, the next thing you know, my sister was like, Jmo, go and then that's woke me up, and I was like, oh my God, I just experienced sleep paralysis, and it was really bad. And she was like, I thought you were gonna die or something.
Oh my gosh.
She would say she think I was gonna die, but she
was
like,
in the middle of the night or like in the morning
in the middle
or
of the
something?
night. And then she was like, it was funny because she wasn't like, oh, I thought like you were choking or something. And I was like, no, I was sleep paralysis. And I was like, but I think from it, I didn't see it as a ghost or something. I just felt like, you're in the state that you can't move, and you're like, wait, what am I doing? Am I going to get out of it?
Yeah.
But then like cultural beliefs, right? Then you're like, okay, is it a ghost or is it not a ghost? What is it? And
it's a conundrum. So I've had sleep paralysis before, and I remember the first time I experienced it, I was shocked because I just never thought I would experience sleep paralysis. What the heck? A lot of people growing up talk about experiencing it, and it just sounds so scary, right? And I mean, easily, if you've looked into this topic, you'll see that there are medieval paintings of sleep paralysis from Europe. And
there's
in Hmong,
religious interpretations.
There's
of
like
it,
many different cultural, religious interpretations of it, spiritual interpretations. Nowadays, they have scientists and doctors who are studying it scientifically to explain what it is. Yes. But it's pretty scary.
Yeah. So what's the scientific definition of sleep paralysis? According to WebMD, sleep paralysis is a feeling of being conscious but unable to move. Mm-hmm. It occurs when a person passes between stages of wakefulness and sleep. During these transitions, they may be unable to speak or move for a few minutes, and then they may also feel pressure or a sense of choking. So that's the WebMD scientific definition of sleep paralysis.
So zhao da zhao zhuo literally translates as like you
have experience.
That means like you are. How would you translate that in English? Zhao da zhao zhuo.
Zhao da, that means.
Zhao da is kind of like you're being haunted almost.
Haunted, yeah.
And so you're haunted and so it's this
you're being haunted, and the way that they haunt you is that
they're like choking you, or they're like
on top of you,
collapsing on you. But the common phrase is just machua, right? So you might talk about that or hear people just say machua.
In the 80s, over 100 Southeast Asian refugees suffered from sleep paralysis, and while they were resettling in the United States, and over 100 died.
They died in their sleep. And it was proven that it was through sleep paralysis, or is it like sort of like a a theory? Like I'm not
Well,
sure.
they called it sudden unexplained death syndrome because these were healthy refugees, and a lot of them were Hmong, and so they're healthy refugees who just went to sleep one day and didn't wake up the next day. The medical terminology nowadays is use a sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, or SADS, but in the 80s they call it SUDS.
So now it's SADS.
SADS. Yeah, we look at this case from the 80s, and they said 10 cases of unexplained death syndrome in Southeast Asian refugees reported to the CDC. The death rate among Southeast Asian males was, in 1987, was 1.1 per 100,000, which was the lowest since 1976. And it just, a lot of Hmong or Southeast Asians were just dying because of SUDS, and it was unexplained. These men who died, right? The length of time they were in the United States was less, from 1 year to 11 years. And then the medium length of time that they arrived here, of the 88 of the 117, this report released in 1988. So the 88 of 117 who died was in the U.S. for at least 17 months only.
Oh, so the statistics are that summarized, then most of the men, like 88 out of 117, had recently just resettled as refugees from the Vietnam War. So they were probably experiencing a tremendous amount of stress, PTSD.
Yeah, and I think it's that biological and psychological factor of being uprooted from home, coming to the United States, experiencing modernization for the first time. I think for the Hmong community, I could speak for the Hmong community because we came from an agrarian culture, right? We haven't seen big cars, big airplanes, big buildings. And for us to just uproot from that lifestyle, now we're in the U.S., then they say, hey, you're the man of the house. Go get a 9-to-5 and support your family. Send your kids to school.
Sure.
They've never experienced this type of structured society. And I guess, some of them, because of this stress level, led to them just anxiety, being unable to, I guess in Lumong là the bông huy chỉ, so it's any bông huy chỉ, they go to sleep and then they just pass.
I think we've talked about this before, maybe in more than one of our previous podcasts, just about the types of stressors that everyone, but also more specifically men, might have experienced with resettlement, because there's so much pressure on them to be the head of the household. And when there's such a big and vast cultural difference and you are having a really hard time grappling with that, like if you do at any way experience sleep paralysis and you're already feeling negative and like you're already feeling in a weak and vulnerable place, like maybe that can also contribute. Like all of those things can contribute to you just not waking up from such an experience, I guess.
And I think it's understanding that the cultural aspect plays a large part in this too, because in that article in the Atlantic, it talked about how there was a shaman who was explaining the sleep paralysis or sudden unexplained death syndrome, and they're like, because we were uprooted from our place, our homeland, we came here, we did not follow the proper procedures for our ancestors, and we did not meet those criteria.
I feel like I've heard that multiple times, but I don't understand what it means. Like, do you have more insight?
For our culture, like got right? So got and as the male head household, you have to do certain things ritually to suffice your ancestors and make up for shortcomings. So in our culture, we believe that, today something's wrong with me. Why is something wrong with me? I had a dream about one of my ancestor, and then you go explain that to a shaman, and they would be like, because your ancestor is reaching out to you because you need to do this and this to meet that criteria.
Sure.
So imagine if you didn't do it, and then imagine if you just left Laos, you came here, and now you can't perform that right anymore, right? And so some of them culturally, it's always lingering that I have not failed to perform this. I have failed to perform this.
Oh, so it's a lingering thought in their head also.
Yeah.
So that's another factor that might have contributed.
And so it probably eats at them. For a lot of men, you know, if they're super religious, they're like brought up to be like, and it's our culture too, right? ก็โตตัวก็รักครอบครัวก็โตเกิดการหลีกใจก็โตuphold all these things to meet certain criteria, or bad things will happen to you, right? And
then it's something in the back of your mind.
Yeah, something that's in the back of your mind, and then it lingers. Well, and then that contributes
to your mental health. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
And so that's why they say it's psychological.
The cases in the 80s of the Southeast Asian men dying also kind of sparked an interest in the broader community about why this was happening. I don't know if I have an answer. I mean, I think it's interesting because we're looking at also the scientific definition of sleep paralysis. And I think when I was younger, I would experience sleep paralysis in more of this sort of spooky spiritual sense where there was like a dark being coming into the room. You kind of notice that because you're half awake, half asleep. It's because like scientifically, it's like something that happens. It's an experience or a phenomenon that happens when you're waking up from REM sleep, but you're still in REM sleep. So you're awake and then your body's not able to move and you can't talk. And for me, I noticed that it's like that's what it is. Like you're trying to wake up. And so you can't talk. And so it's almost like a battle and trying to like wake up and trying to scream and wake up. So when I was younger, I would have sort of the spooky side, but I have not experienced sleep paralysis for a while. And the last few times I did, there was no spookiness to it. It was just, oh, I'm up and I can't move. And usually this is what it feels like when I'm getting, you know, right. But there's no da part now. And so I think it's interesting that there's that I experienced both like a spooky experience, but also a non-spooky experience where it's just like, oh, this is so weird. Like, am I paralyzed or something? That in itself is scary. But then I've heard that some people enjoy the phenomenon of sleep paralysis where it's only going to last a few minutes. So sometimes when they experience it, they just enjoy it because it's enjoyable, I guess. I don't know. It freaks me out. So I don't know if I have an answer to that question on like, what is it? But it did cause a lot of questions during the 80s about why these men were dying because they were healthy.
Right. Healthy men dying. And I think it's has to be with I think it's cultural beliefs and also trauma and being new to a country exacerbated by, you know, the stress of resettling here. And then, you know, it just leads to them going to sleep and not waking back up. To piggyback on what you said, you know, for me growing up Hmong, when you were younger and you would listen to your parents or you listen to elders and they would just talk about you like, oh yeah, sleep paralysis, it is a supernatural being that's coming to haunt you or a supernatural being that's trying to choke you. And so the experience used to be really scary. But like you said, as I think I got older too, and then I think my most recent sleep paralysis, like I could anticipate it. Like literally you go to sleep and you're like,
that's true. Yeah. Actually, that's kind of true.
You could anticipate
it.
When you're going to get sleep paralysis.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of agree. Like I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And then for me, I told myself to wake up. I was like, wake up, 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 wake up. And then I wake up.
I try my hardest to scream. That's what I do. And then you can't talk. It's weird.
Yeah. And I figured when for me, when I experienced sleep paralysis, I figured move an arm or move a leg.
Yeah, or like move a pinky or something like that. Just like move.
Once you can move, you wake up. Yeah. And so that's what I do. Once I move, I wake up. But then there's this, effect, that's was talked about by this article in the Atlantic. And, they said it was a nocebo effect. And
so what does that mean?
A nocebo effect is the opposite of a placebo effect.
Okay.
Yeah, so a placebo effect would be like, I give you a fake pill, you eat it, and you think
doesn't really work, but you think it works,
and you're better.
Okay.
A nocebo effect is I give you a fake pill, I tell you, or you believe that this pill is gonna kill you, or it's going to cause harm.
Oh, so
And then,
it does.
It does.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea, but instead of a positive change, it's a negative one.
change. And so they say
Wow.
because of our cultural belief that, when we get sleep paralysis, we think it's a ghost, then exacerbate the experience, and it may lead to, our heart rapidly beating and causing us to die because of that very, very traumatic experience.
That's really freaky,
and
actually.
So that's a scientific explanation to why.
Yeah, it's super freaky.
Yeah. And, just think about it. When you go to sleep, you see a supernatural being, or you grew up in a culture that you think that it's a supernatural being that's coming to attack you. And then you get so scared you die. Mm-hmm. That's Freddy Krueger. So I guess, and Wes Craven, when he Nightmare on Elm Street, it's classic horror movie.
Sure.
In an interview, he said that he picked up a newspaper from the LA Times in like the 80s, and he read about like a Cambodian refugee and some other Hmong refugees who died of a sleep paralysis. Mm-hmm. And that inspired him to create the character and the movie
Freddy Krueger and
Krueger
Nightmare on Elm Street.
And Nightmare on Elm Street.
It's interesting that you bring up Freddy Krueger, because I feel like this story inspires a lot of sort of Hollywood inquiries, if you want to bring it up. Like, I know recently there was a supernatural show on the CW that aired specifically on sleep paralysis, and I watched it, and it's not only focused on the Hmong experience, it's focused on sleep paralysis overall and in general, but they do a large part of it is focused on the Hmong experience, and they interviewed like a shaman, and they interviewed a scholar, and then they even interviewed one of the brothers to one of the men who died in their sleep. And I think you had also mentioned that there were women who died in their sleep too, right? Mm-hmm. Like 2 women.
Yeah, I think in one of the reports it says like 1 or 2 women who also died.
Crazy. And so it's a really interesting episode. If you haven't seen it, it's free on the CW. You just go, you can watch it for free on your phone or like on the computer and stuff. But one interesting part, so the episode explores obviously the spiritual kind of spooky aspects of it. It follows this man who is experiencing sleep paralysis. And so he kind of goes to the host of the show and is like, I have this problem. And then together they kind of investigate like different interpretations of sleep paralysis, one being the Hmong interpretation of and then like there's scientific like REM sleep explorations and definitions of it as well. But it was quite interesting because then they shortly interview people who have experienced sleep paralysis, and there's all sorts of people, and they draw what they see, and I mean, I don't know how accurate it is, but one person would like draw this like sort of spooky like image of a dark shadow or like this old hag or like a woman, and then they would show it like, is this what you saw? And they'd be like, yeah, that's what I saw. And I'm like, I don't know if that's what I saw, but I mean, it's kind of that concept of like a lot of people experience this. So I mean, like, I think in Indonesia it's called Digunten. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that means pressed on, which is kind of the same thing as Dorachocho. Yeah, right. And then in China it's called Beiguya, maybe? Beiguya. Held by a ghost. Yeah. And then, of course, the old hag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I don't watch scary movies. Because culturally, you're brought up, scary movie as in like, as when we experience, right? Because pressing ghosts and all that, that's embedded in our culture. And when I watch movies like, what's that one recent movie that came out a couple of years ago? It was Insidious.
Oh, that was freaky.
Yeah, Insidious, because of the Hmong culture and just like having this psychological factor of like, okay, our culture believes in ghosts. It's scary. And then when, I think in there, the kid, when they say he was a kid, he used to astral project, or he used to sleepwalk.
Astral projection.
Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh God, I used to sleepwalk when I was a kid.
Wow.
And I would just go out the door, or I would sleepwalk and go to the closet. And then I was like, okay, I can't watch Insidious anymore because it's bringing up.
It's almost like too real.
Yeah, and I was like,
it's creepy.
I am not astral projecting. I am not. All this is scientific. It's not real. But then you're like, okay, I grew up Hmong. It might be scary. It's getting to me now. I say maybe if I didn't grow up with that knowledge and I watched the film, then I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah. But then you realize, oh my God,
this is so similar to what we believe in that it feels almost real.
Yeah.
Or it explains. It just aligns, and then it gets creepy because that stuff is.
So they call that like a biopsychological connection, right? So bio was just because we experience it, and psychological because we think it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we experience it and we think it, we have that super connection that makes us more susceptible to, sleep paralysis or SUDS. And there's this one unique study, in Wisconsin where they did a study for 747 Hmong men and women, and the conclusion of the study was that Hmong people are at higher risk for nighttime triggers for SUDS, and that includes like REM-like symptom, sleep apnea, and it's these stressful experiences that complicates sleep paralysis within our community. And so I guess because we psychologically think that it's da and it's a ghost or it's a supernatural phenomenon, then that really, from this study, exacerbates our experience to sleep paralysis and makes it worse. Therefore, it may result in more like something like sudden unexplained death syndrome.
That's super interesting because like, one thing to note, though, is there haven't been any cases of death with SUDS or with sleep paralysis since the 80s, right?
Yeah. I don't think there's big within the Hmong community, but there are, like, SUDS experiences around the world. Because I think one of the latest studies I have here.
Was it in the Philippines, was it?
It's a sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, the 100 Years Enigma. It's a study released by the CDC, and they said it's like a multifactional disorder, that affects different racial and ethnic disparities. And and so they also concluded that it might be genetics. So I think there's a scientific theory that SUDS, or a sudden unexplained death syndrome, has to do with something with your heart, excuse my language, cardiomyopathies.
Cardiomyopathies.
Yeah, that's hard pronunciation, right? Sorry, we're not doctors here. Yeah, and so it might be genetics. So I guess Hmong people, we might carry the gene to make us.
Is it okay? I mean, I don't know much about that claim about it being genetics, but then it does make me think about our like mythologies about us kind of like being passed down this ability to have these like supernatural,
right?
Not like,
remember I was joking with you,
like tendencies or experiences.
I was joking with you the other day. I was like, oh, Hmong people, why we're shamans, and why we see supernatural beings.
Yeah.
Because we are the last descendants of Nuwa.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah, no, because like we have these sort of like, how would you describe it? Like mythologies or like folklore, legends.
Our folklore, like our mythology about the creation of the world, right? It was about, and it's in our funeral songs too, when they sing about that the world was created, and back then humans used to walk on earth with demons, and there was a big war, and the humans used whatever to throw at the demons, and the demons used like hot salt pepper to throw at the humans' eyes. So now we don't see demons or ghosts anymore, but they still see us. And that's one of the creation story that they talk about, where humans and ghosts or supernatural beings used to live on the same plane. And I'm just saying, like, Chinese mythologies, as a joke, I was like, oh, okay, I could make this crazy claim that
hey, we support these mythologies.
That Hmong people were the last descendants of Nuwa, which is Nuwa is Gok Yan Chong, right?
Or even Mingo Kaying,
right?
Who is the goddess who like a fertility basically that helps you.
And I was like, why
bring
do we
children to the
I was
world.
joking, Pachia. I was like, why do we support that claim? Because look, our shamans are still fighting ghosts nowadays. We have dreams that we think it's ghosts, and I was like, oh, we're people of antiquity because we believe
We do hold on to these very old beliefs, but
conspiracy theories. These are not real. I'm just joking around, but hey, it's worth a shot.
I wouldn't call them conspiracy theories. I think that's totally different. No, but like some people like do have these like spiritual beliefs, and I think it changes from person to person, maybe even like shaman to shaman, because I follow shamans on YouTube sometimes, so I listen in, and there's this sort of new story of Hmong origins that has been circulating
didn't you tell me one about thunder or something?
Yeah, like how the Hmong people are actually descended from the god of thunder, and that's why when we have anything, we call on the god of thunder. And I was like, I didn't know that, so I asked my parents, and I was like, do we do that? And my dad was like, yeah, we do that. Taobe, like, I don't want to be quoted because I could be saying it wrong, but you know, whenever we need something, and behu like saw, right? Behu saw, and I can't report that claim because I don't know much about it. But the idea was that Saw, or the god of thunder, he came down for some reason, and he fell in love with a woman, and then they got married and they had kids, but he wasn't supposed to like intermingle with humans, and so he was punished for that, and then he became Zinyu. And so because they like that was his punishment, I think he had some ultimatum or something. So though he promised like if for his kids, he promised like if you ever need me, you can just call on me. And so that's why we have these beliefs where we can call on them, these more indigenous, or if you want to call it supernatural or spiritual beliefs, where we can call on the god of thunder, on Saw, to come and help you like in situations. And there's people who claim like, yeah, like in really dire situations, they've done that and been protected and safe and stuff. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But it's just kind of, when you talk about genetics, I'm like, yeah, because we descended from the god of thunder. So we have, just a joke, but it's kind of funny to think about.
Yeah, I think it's just that, well, it just shows, what we're talking about just proves and shows that we are a people who, you know, we believe culturally in supernatural beings, or we believe that there's a higher entity that's affecting us in multiple ways, just not one entity but multiple entities.
Sure.
And I think that, you know, sometimes you believe it, then it affects you in a way that's either positive or bad. Nocebo effect, right?
I mean, there's the placebo, but then there's the nocebo too.
And,
so
you know, I think it's religious too. You know, like people, Christians, they believe in God, and you know, back then, exorcism and possessions and all that was a big thing. You know, and
still is.
It still is. Right?
I mean, yeah, I think there's like an entire branch of the Vatican dedicated just to exorcisms. So,
and there's also a Hmong pastor who actually does exorcism a lot. He's on social media, so you guys know him. Go check him out.
Yeah. So I don't think that we have an answer for why exactly this phenomenon happened with the deaths in the 80s. You can see that it sparked a lot of cultural interest, not just in the collective memory of the Hmong people and how we remember our resettlement experiences, but also from the general public, and how it's inspired like horror films that are now classic horror films in Hollywood and in the world. But let us know what you all think. And have you ever experienced sleep paralysis? How did it happen? Let us know your stories.
Yeah, tell the stories in the comments. We would love to read it and read about your experiences and your thoughts on sleep paralysis, or like we call it in Hmong, Chao Dat Chao Chua.
And especially if you're not Hmong, we'd love to hear if you've ever experienced that too.
Yeah, and if there's other culturally religious explanation that, you know, your culture or you think about it, let us know too. We want to know like, oh, what's the similarities or not so similarities between our interpretations of sleep paralysis.
Definitely. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll see you all for the next podcast.